Middle of the country, but not middle of the road opinions. It's the podcast dedicated to sports in the air capital of the world.
I'm going to Wichita.
Wichita, Kansas, and beyond. With Tommy Castor and Weston Mills. This is Keeper of the Games.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Keeper of the Games. We are the podcast all about sports in the air capital of Wichita, Kansas, and beyond. I'm your host, Tommy Castor. My co-host, Weston Mills, not with us today. His wife is actually having a baby right now as we speak. So I'm flying solo on the podcast today, and you're probably thinking to yourself, if you're a frequent listener of the podcast, didn't you just drop an episode? The answer is yes. We dropped a brand new episode on Wednesday where we talked in depth about the situation at Wichita State University and the allegations surrounding head coach Gregg Marshall. And we wanted to bring some bonus content to you this week. And so we welcome our special guest on the podcast. College basketball insider Jeff Goodman joins us on Keeper of the Games. Jeff, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Tommy. Appreciate it, man. How you doing?
I'm great, and I'm excited to get in and talk a little bit about this. It's obviously not a positive topic at all, but it's one that is necessary to talk about. It was about a week ago, Jeff, that the initial story broke that you investigated through Stadium, that article dropped, and we're about a week later, at least here locally in Wichita. The story continues to stay top of mind. It continues to be pretty prevalent in the news cycle, but I'd love to know what's the very latest in this situation about a week after the initial story broke.
So in the last 48 hours, Shaq Morris told me he spoke to the investigators for over an hour. And in the last 24 hours, I've been told that at least one of his teammates, according to my sources, has also spoken to the investigator and confirmed the story that Shaq told, which was that Gregg Marshall did in fact punch him. Those are the allegations. So now you've got where when the story broke, the investigators, to my knowledge, most of the players that I had talked to said that they had not talked to the investigators, that they had been reached out to, but they were leery of the fact of whether or not these were neutral, impartial investigators or whether they were tied in with Wichita State and Gregg Marshall. So a lot of them did not get back to the investigators. And to be honest, a lot of the players I talked to said they've never even been contacted. Some of them said they have not even been contacted from that 2015 team by the investigators. So now the question is, how quickly does this law firm get everything together, type it up, get it to the proper people, whether that's Darren Boatwright, whether that's the Board of Regents, whether that's the interim president. We really don't know who's making the call here. And that's part of the difficulty of knowing what Wichita State's going to do, because if they had a president, full-time permanent president, you would say, okay, that's the guy who's going to kind of coordinate everything, lead it, probably make the ultimate decision. Right now with an interim president, you just don't know who's making the call.
About 48 hours ago, actually less than that, Gregg Marshall released a second statement from just a few days after his first one that was released by his agent, where in the second one, he unequivocally denied any sort of physical or verbal abuse, anything, all the allegations that were there, which I thought was interesting, Greg, because nothing specific was denied the first time around. But obviously the second statement came out on Tuesday. I'm sure that you've had an opportunity to digest that statement. Anything stand out to you in that?
Well, listen, again, he denied, I don't have it in front of me, but he denied any accountability for punching Shaquille Morris. And I've talked to several other players off the record since that statement. And they're very upset to the point of being furious because, again, he's come out publicly and denied doing it. So I think most of the players right now are deciding and have decided whether to talk to the investigator, number one, instead of coming out publicly. I think they all feel like at this point they'd rather do it behind the scenes than go public. They feel like they want to see what happens in this situation. Is Gregg Marshall allowed to continue to coach? Is he suspended? Is he fired? I think they feel like they want to see what comes out of this before they react publicly and put their names out there. Because, again, as I said in my story, as I've said to various outlets, a lot of these guys are revered in Wichita. They come back, they make money, they run camps, they sign autographs, they walk around and they're praised. And I think they're concerned, some of them, that if they go publicly against the guy who has more juice than anybody else in that city, how does that affect them? And, you know, a lot of people can say, well, they should do the right thing, right? They should come out publicly. Well, but that's easier said than done. I mean, they've still got careers to think about and things of that nature. They're young. They're trying to get established. So I understand both sides of it.
Jeff, when you first broke this story, and I was reading through it a week ago and kind of digesting everything through it, I think the thing that stood out to me the most was that the key component, the key player in this is Shaquille Morris. We're not talking about a walk-on. We're not talking about a reserve player, a bench player. We're talking about a linchpin in that Shocker squad for a number of years. And that was the most telling to me. And, you know, I've talked to a lot of different people where, you know, whether or not they're discrediting the allegations or not, I think the overall sentiment is that this is a big deal just because it's somebody at the stature of Shaq Morris.
I feel bad. I feel bad that so many people in Wichita are questioning whether Shaq Morris's claims are legitimate. Because, again, as somebody who's heard it from Shaq on the record, from Ty Taylor on the record, and 6 other players all telling me their accounts and confirming that that Gregg Marshall punched him. I've heard it all. I've heard it from 8 different people. So it's hard for me to understand this right now. And then I've heard it from multiple people that he choked Kyle Lindstedt. And, you know, the player in question that he body shamed, that I keep telling people this, the most difficult conversation I've had throughout all this clearly comes from the father of the player who's body shamed, because that player was called fat, was called ugly by Marshall, was brought over, picked up his shirt, grabbed his stomach in front of the whole team, demeaned. And that player really never played basketball again for the most part. And his father told me he's been in his basement, in his parents' basement for the last 3 years, and wouldn't go out with friends, wouldn't talk to anybody, including the family. Like, they found out about this, the family, when I called the father.
Wow.
They had no idea because the kid would never talk to him about everything that had happened. And he said I talked to him again about a week or so ago, and he said he's doing much better. Ever since we talked to him, I think it has allowed him to be a little bit more open about it. So he's been better. So that part for me is encouraging. But I just feel like there's listen, Tommy, I didn't even go into a lot of the stuff that Gregg Marshall said that was vile, that was crude. I've mentioned it here and there in a few interviews, but I could do a whole nother story about some of the things he said about the 3 7-footers, 21 foot of grade A. The word starts with a P. I'm not going to say it. Talking about another former player and who was dating a stripper at the time. And this I got from multiple sources telling that player, go get your girlfriend off her pole and come get you.
Wow.
Like things of that nature that honestly, I didn't feel like we're at a level I needed even to put him in the story. Completely different. I mean, did we see what Nerger's girlfriend tweeted out? You see that?
I did see that.
I'm not going to repeat it because I can't. It's disgusting. And those are things that honestly, listen, a lot of coaches, they hear those stories and they're like, no big deal.
Yeah.
You know, that is in the coaching culture. Maybe not to that extent, okay? Maybe not to that high level, but there are coaches that use that type of verbiage while coaching. But I think you've got the physical abuse, the mental abuse, then you've got the crude language and the personal attacks. That was the thing. Talking to all these players, former players, current players, former coaches, current coaches, the one thing that was pretty much transcended through all of them was that he makes it personal. Gregg Marshall makes it personal. And that was the biggest issue I think everybody had.
We're talking with Jeff Goodman, college basketball insider here on Keeper of the Games. Jeff, on our last episode, I went into detail on my opinion. We're not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk to you. But I made it pretty clear that, this is kind of an open secret in the city. I've lived here my entire life. I can't say I've been around Shocker basketball, but I've been around enough people that are around Shocker basketball that everybody just kind of knows who Gregg Marshall is. But that culture of winning, everybody has sort of turned a blind eye to it over the years because he won. And it's undeniable. I'll be the first to say the level of success that he brought and what he's done to the city as a whole. The guy can coach, and what he did transformed this city. And so I think a lot of people were willing to give him a pass. They were willing to say, you know what, he's prickly. He's a jerk. He can be an asshole, but he wins, and that's all that matters. I talked quite a bit about just the overall culture with the program, with the university, and with the city, how we all sort of contributed to it. We all sort of coated him in Teflon for a long time. And so it's collectively, in my opinion, everyone shares a little bit to blame in this. But are you surprised at all by the rationalization or the excusing away of some of these allegations from people, whether it's local or national? You have a lot more Twitter followers than I have. And when I've tweeted that out, I've had Shocker fans that have attacked me. I can only imagine the response that you've gotten.
Yeah, I've gotten some, disturbing, I guess you would say, direct messages on Twitter aimed at my daughter and my wife. And listen, anybody who's listening, I don't care what you say about me. I honestly don't. I've done this long enough. I'm not in it to make friends. I've had issues with Mike Krzyzewski. I've had issues with Roy Williams. I went to Arizona. I can't even go. There was a point where I couldn't go to Tucson, Arizona without checking in under an assumed name when I went to stay in a hotel for a game. So I get it. I had to change my home number because of Kentucky fans years ago. So I get it. Just let's leave my freaking wife and daughter out of it. Come on. Yeah. So yes, I guess I'm surprised, but I had somebody call me before I put the story out there, and they said, just be careful. Be careful that you don't know what you're in for. And I said, I know. I've dealt with things of this nature before. I've done investigative stories and, on coaches that have ended up being fired. Billy Gillespie's one at Texas Tech years ago. John Thompson III, Kevin Ollie. So I'm not a guy that honestly picks and chooses, whatever the news is that I can find. And this one, listen, the bottom line is the way it went down was 8 guys in the transfer portal. I keep track of the transfer list I have for 15 years. Oh, shit, what's going on here? Let me check into it. Let me make some phone calls. Digging on that, well, you dig into some more stuff. You dig into the fact that, hey, did you ever hear what happened to Gregg Marshall back in 2015? All right, maybe I better start calling around on that one. Okay, let me call. Listen, I went all the way back to Winthrop. Yeah, I have stories of him at Winthrop, a player who went on the record to me basically saying nothing has changed with Gregg Marshall. So, again, I think, yes, I'm surprised a little bit, but winning breeds a lot of it takes care and hides a lot of the other issues. And as long as you win, then you have power. And if you have power, then there's a level of fear involved. And again, I'm not going to say whether or not Gregg Marshall should be fired, suspended, kept, whatever. I'm trying to bring to light, to me, something that's happened that I just don't think there's any place for when coaching. And that's punching a player. That's laying your hands on an assistant coach. That's several issues of verbal abuse. Telling a kid to get back on his horse, a Native American kid, making Indian calls. By the way, the other part is, and I'll say it because I've said it on everything I've done here. I did not pay Shaq Morris for the story. I've never paid anybody for a story in my life. I learned my craft at the Associated Press. And I will never, ever, 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 ever pay for a story in my entire life. So
And
$50,000 too, Tommy, man, that's a lot of money. I wish I had 50 grand lying around that I could, do something with like that.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is that the people that are throwing that out there about, paying, I get that that can be a thing, but at the end of the day, if the story is true or false,
it doesn't excuse.
It doesn't matter whether or not
right.
somebody's been paid, paid or not. I thought it was interesting. I actually got into a kind of a Twitter back and forth over the weekend, and I'm not going to say his name, but with an ESPN college basketball analyst.
No, I almost went at him, Tommy. I almost went at him. Listen. It took everything I could not to go back after. Mark Adams is the person you're probably referring to. I have no problem. Listen, if you know me well enough, I have no problem. There's nothing off the record really for me in terms of talking about. I mean, come on, man. Yes, you covered as many games as any other ESPN analyst.
Yeah.
Good for you. Good for you. Were you there? Were you there when Shaq Morris allegedly got punched? Because if you weren't, then you don't know. So let the people that were there for that, or for Kyle Lindstad getting choked, or for this player getting body shamed. Like, I get it. Mark Adams, you're old school.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're old school. Maybe you like, listen, he's not the only, he came out publicly defending Gregg Marshall for the most part. There's plenty of look at some of the other ESPN analysts that haven't even weighed in on.
Right.
Some of the other big ESPN analysts. I don't have to call those guys out. You can figure out who it is. Jay Billis tweeted it out. Dick Vitale tweeted it out. There are some other guys, if you go through their Twitter feeds, that are boys with Gregg Marshall that didn't tweet out anything. And that's inexcusable to me. That's inexcusable that you're going to take care of you. Like, that's something I've never believed in. To me, whether this was Gregg Marshall or some coach that I'm extremely tight with, I'm going to write this story. You punch a player, you're damn well right I'm going to write it.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there. Are you surprised at all with the fact that Gregg Marshall has not been suspended? And I guess my follow-up to that is, do you have faith in this investigation? There are rumors going around about whether or not the administration has been complicit in this over the years and had knowledge of it. I've even heard in the city people talking about the chance that Darren Boatwright himself could lose his job if it comes out that there was knowledge of that. So are you surprised that he hasn't been suspended? And then do you have faith in the investigation?
Yes, I was surprised that he wasn't suspended immediately pending the finality of the investigation. I was surprised. I thought you had to do that with an accusation like this, with two different media outlets, now three, including your local media outlet there. So yeah, I was surprised, but I think, listen, the only reason this investigation started was because I called Darren Boatwright 2 months ago. It's the only reason this investigation ever started, ultimately. And again, should I have called him at that? Well, listen, we were actually talking about something else. And I was like, you have some time to talk tomorrow? We talked, and I was pretty forthright. That's how I am. I had nothing to hide on this thing. Gregg Marshall, trust me, he knew I was working on this back in May, because I didn't tell players, hey, keep it quiet or anything like that. I didn't. It was easy for me to get all the stories. I would call one player off the record. They would tell me everything. Then they would say, yeah, you might want to call this guy. I would call him. I get another different story. I've never done a story that was easier to access information in stories than this one. So I didn't feel the need to honestly hide much from Darren Boatwright. I called him and told him not everything I had, but I told him some stuff, and he said, no, we didn't know that. And then they started the investigation days later. But yeah, is he in trouble? Sure. I mean, listen, if you're Darren Boatwright, you've been there through all this, right? You've been there through all this. Was there a tape? That's the big question too.
Sure.
The big question is, was there a tape? Because they tape practice. I'm told it's not on the practice tape. I don't know. I mean, again, who knows whether they recorded that part of the practice, whether they got that part after, when they were kind of walking out of the door of the practice gym. I don't know. I don't know the answers to that one. But yeah, listen. I think everything's on the table right now. And the only thing that's not, I would say, is like the only big shocker would be if Gregg Marshall doesn't get suspended at the very least.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, again, you've got multiple players now corroborating. I've got Ty Taylor, who corroborated it. Shaq's talked to the investigator. At least one more player, not named Ty Taylor, has talked to the investigator, according to my sources. So you got multiple guys at this point. And you can look at the tweet from Nerger's, his fiance, former girlfriend, fiance now. If I'm the investigator, I'm calling her. I'm calling Nerger, finding out what went on there. So there's just so much smoke right now. And, do I trust the investigation? Here's what I'll say. And I've talked to the investigators. They reached out to me. What I will say is, if that were me, and I talked to 37 people now. It was 36 at the time, and one more player came forward, an eighth source that was there to tell me that he saw the punch. If it's me, I'm getting every single number of every player, especially from that 2015 team, and I'm reaching out to every single one of them. There are multiple players as of yesterday who had told me they had not been contacted at all by the investigators. Like, really?
Wow.
Really? Like there's only 15 players or so, 16, maybe, with walk-ons, maybe get 16, 17 guys, right? How are you not contacting all 17 of them and saying, hey, we're here. We'd like to talk to you. So am I saying the investigation isn't legit? I don't know. But, man, as a reporter, I'm one person doing it all. They've got a firm of people. I think they can reach out, at least reach out to 20 dudes.
Sure. Yeah. And the thing about it is that there's precedence with this within Wichita State.
Right.
Former women's coach Jody Adams was accused of mistreatment. She was nearly immediately suspended before she lost her job. I believe that was in 2017. So it's not like
Jody Adams. Hey, Tommy, Jody Adams isn't Gregg Marshall. No power. No power.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
The guy makes $3.5 million a year. As we've talked about, he runs the city, and you better make sure, and I get that part, like legally, you better make sure you have this thing buttoned up, kind of like I did when I wrote this story.
Sure.
I did not write it 2 months ago when I had it all sourced. I had the same 35 people, all of them sourced. But I said to myself, you know what? I owe it to me. I owe it also to Gregg Marshall to make sure I get somebody on the record here.
Right.
Because otherwise, you don't want to put out a story right away and potentially ruining somebody's career without making sure you're 100% sure. So I felt like I needed at least one player, and I got two on the record. And that was, to me, the difference between me being able to run that story when I did.
Well, without really getting into the local media aspect of it, I do feel like, at least here locally, being in Wichita, there are a lot of rose-colored glasses that are on right now, whether it's local television outlets, radio, talk radio, newspaper, that sort of thing. I wanted to make sure that we did a podcast, and we're talking about content that maybe doesn't paint as rosy of a picture as what everybody else is trying. I don't know if it's revisionist history or what exactly it is, but I guess my final question for you, Greg, you're not Greg, you're Jeff. My final question for you, Jeff, before we get out of here is, where do you think this goes? And what's the next step? Where does the process take us? Obviously, the investigation is ongoing, but do you anticipate that this will continue to stay prevalent, at least here locally, for the next several weeks, or will it die off and then come back later? What do you think?
When are you running this podcast, Tommy?
Well, today is the plan.
All right. Well, by the time you have it out, who knows? I mean, I think it could move that quickly, again, because like I said, kind of at the outset, things have changed in the last 48 hours. Yeah. Now the investigator has these players on the record. They've got to type it up. They've got to get it to the powers that be at Wichita right now. Bear with me one sec. And then Wichita's got to figure out what to do with it, right? So, who's making the decision, right? I mean, right. Is this Darren Boatwright? Is this the Board of Regents? Is this the interim president? How do they – obviously, there's got to be legal, right? General counsel's got to be involved here at the highest level to be able to – if you're going to do anything, whether it's a suspension or firing him, you've got to make damn well sure that everything's lined up, that you can do that legally. So I think right now, to me, they've got all this new information. They have the stories, but they've got all this new information. They're trying to get the investigation completely done. You've got more players coming forward now, yesterday and potentially today. Does that drag it out into next week? Maybe, but I wouldn't be shocked by not by the time you put this out, but Friday wouldn't shock me if something's announced Friday.
Wow. Well, I guess we'll obviously have to keep our eyes open and, ears open on what goes on. And like I said at the outset, this is not a fun topic to talk about,
no,
especially here locally, but it is
terrible.
Necessary. And so we really appreciate you taking the time coming on the show. I'd love to have you back sometime when we kind of know what's going on. We can talk a little bit more about it, but really appreciate you being on, Jeff.
No, thanks for having me, Tommy. Appreciate it. Appreciate your integrity and just kind of giving, I think that's what everybody should be doing right now, is keeping an open mind and trying to get the information and letting the process play out. Yes, my story shouldn't have been enough right away to fire Gregg Marshall necessarily. You still need to do your due diligence if you're Wichita State to make sure to talk to Shaq through the investigator. They've done that, and now they have a decision to make.
Jeff Goodman, college basketball insider, joins us here on Keeper of the Games.
You've been listening to Keeper of the Games with Tommy Castor and Weston Mills. Don't forget to subscribe, download, and listen on all major podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. Find the podcast and videos on Facebook and YouTube at Keeper of the Games, and follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram